as Kojong was opening up Joseon by signing trade pacts with European countries, Japan, and America, he sent emissaries to Qing Dynasty, Japan, and America. The elites who went to these countries with emissaries came back with different ideas. Because both Qing Dynasty and Japan had the desire to control Joseon for their own benefit, naturally the politics in Joseon was divided into pro-Qing and pro-Japan parties. The politicians who went to Japan and studied in Japan wanted change the Joseon just like what Japan was doing. At the time, Japan was going through a major reform. So these people were called pro-Japan radical progressive. In Qing Dynasty at that time, a self-strengthening movement was going on, led by Heungsun. They didn't want to change anything about Confucianism, but they wanted to learn new techniques in military and the scientific knowledge. The politicians from Joseon who went to Qing Dynasty and studied there wanted the same kind of change as what Qing was doing. They didn't want to abandon the culture of Confucianism, but they wanted to learn the scientific knowledge and the new military techniques and weapons from Western countries. They were called pro-Qing moderate progressives. The former was also called the Party of Reformers, and the latter was also called the Party of Serving the Great, or the Sadedang, meaning they are serving Qing Dynasty. The radical progressives were deeply indebted by Fukuzawa Yugichi in Japan. He was the teacher of them, and they were deeply connected with them. They respected him very much. But the goal of Yugichi was to make them the ruling party of Joseon government on behalf of Japanese government. Then Japanese wanted Joseon to be separated from Qing Dynasty and then make Joseon as the colony of Japan. In 1882, Heungsun's Coupe ended in 33 days by Qing troops, and Kojong and Queen Min came back to power, but they could not exercise their authority fully because Qing stepped up her interference with Joseon's internal matter. Politics of Joseon was in favor of the pro-Qing moderate progressives, and Kojong had to follow what Qing was doing for the modernization of Joseon. Kojong needed money for the modernization of Joseon, and Kojong decided to borrow the money from Qing Dynasty, and Qing agreed to loan the money to Joseon. However, Qing wanted to make sure Joseon was spending money for the purpose because Joseon promised Japan to compensate for the damage done during 1882 coup. Kojong felt bad about Qing's interference with his authority, and he summoned the radical progressives and let them go to Japan and negotiate a huge amount of loan from Japan. The head of progressives, the Kim Ok-kyun, thought he could persuade Japan by saying that if Japan helped Joseon and modernized Joseon, then Joseon would sever the relationship with Qing dynasty, and Qing's power will be compromised. Kim Ok-kyun and radical progressives believed in that Joseon is not a really independent country but belonged to Qing dynasty. To recover the sovereignty of Joseon, Joseon must get some help from Japan and modernize the country. They were blindsided in that they were trying to get rid of the present ruler, but they were in fact bringing another ruler instead. Kim Ok-kyun and others who went to Japan met emperors and Japanese government officials, asked a huge amount of loan, that was about 6 times more than what Joseon got from Qing dynasty. It caused heated discussions amongst Japanese politicians, and they felt that it was too early to intervene between Qing and Joseon because it might have caused the war, and Japanese was not confident to win the war against Qing dynasty at the time. Yukichi told Kim that Joseon had to stop the dominance of Qing dynasty over Joseon, and he also told him that that is the only way for Joseon to become strong and independent country. And he promised him that Japan would help Joseon to modernize the country. As Kim and the radical progressives came back to Joseon from Japan with empty-handed, their position in the government had become very weak. On the other hand, the moderate progressives' position in the government had become very strong, and Qing's interference with internal matter had become intolerable. Kim and the radical progressives conspired the coup with Japanese. The leaders of the radical progressives were in their 20s. They were very courageous, but they were very sloppy in planning the coup. They did not weigh the pros and cons of this huge challenge. Actually, their lives were on the line. The leaders of the radical progressives asked the Japanese ambassador in Korea that how you could take care of 3,000 troops with a few hundred Japanese troops. And he answered to them that Japanese troops were far superior to Qing's, so we can defeat them. And these young people believed in what the ambassador told them. In 1884, the Qing was fighting against France. France invaded Vietnam, and Qing and Vietnam had the relationship like Joseon had, the suzerain and tributary relationship. Qing moved 1,500 troops for the war between France and Qing, and the radical progressives thought that it was the good opportunity to execute the planned coup. It was about half of 3,000 troops in Joseon. Qing lost the war against France, and Vietnam fell into French hand. Japan saw it, and they thought that it was the good time to go ahead and execute the plan. And they confided it to the radical progressives in Joseon. It was about 7 p.m. In December 4th of 1884. There was a dinner party for the opening ceremony of the first post office in Joseon. It was the part of the modernization of Joseon. The cabinet members and some leaders of the radical progressives, as well as the ambassadors from different countries, were sitting and having dinner. And they put the soldiers around the building hidden. And then they put up a fire around the post office, and they created a sort of disorderous situation, and then they let the soldiers attack the people who belonged to the conservatives and the moderate progressives. But the only one they can hurt was the Min Young-ik, who was the leader of the moderate progressives and the relative of Queen Min. And they went to the palace, and then they arrested Ko Jong and Queen Min into a small building. And then they let the cabinet members visit the king and queen, and then as they came, they killed them. The leaders of Coupe put the king and the queen into a small building because it was easy for them to defend against any force that tried to rescue them. And Queen Min sent a message secretly to the embassy of Qing in Seoul. Ko Jong and Queen Min told Kim Ok-gyun that the building is too small for them to carry on any government affairs. They were very persistent about it, and finally Kim gave in, and then they moved them to the palace. The palace was very big, and the palace was guarded by the 150 troops of Japanese. The next day, the radical progressives formed a cabinet and announced 14 points of reform. But it did not last even a day. On the following day, the Qing troops came down to the palace as soon as they got the message from Queen Min. And the Japanese troops immediately left when they heard the Qing troops were coming down. In fact, Japanese government did not want the direct confrontation against the Qing troops because they didn't have any confidence that they could win the war between them and the Qing dynasty. 1,500 Qing troops led by Sky easily occupied the palace. The coup led by radical progressives ended in 3 days, and Kojong and Queen Min came back to the power. Japanese troops fled the palace immediately after Qing troops came into the palace without any fight, had to leave Chosun with embassy people because they lost the power struggle against Qing. Kim and others who led the coup also went to Japan with Japanese embassy people. Sky, who led the Qing troops, became the governor of Chosun. He was only 26-year-old, and Qing started to manage Chosun as the colony of 19th century imperialism. So Chosun was basically under the rule of Qing, represented by Sky until 1894. So the Qing's ruling of Chosun lasted about longer than 10 years until the Qing lost the war against Japan in 1894. Li Hongjiang of Qing and Ito Hirobumi of Japan met in Tenjin, where Heungsun was house arrested in 1885, and they signed a treaty. It's called Tenjin Treaty. The content of the treaty was basically the troops of Qing and Japan in Korea had to leave Korea, and in case they need to bring back the troops in Korea, they need to let them know each other. The radical progressives basically disappeared in Joseon, and the most powerful politicians in Joseon belonged to the moderate progressives who were pro-Qing. And the Kojong and Queen Min was not the most powerful ruler in Joseon, but the Sky of Qing was the one. After Tenjin Treaty was signed in 1885, Heungsun came back to Joseon with Sky, who was making a trip to Beijing from Joseon. Heungsun came back to Joseon in nearly 4 years of house arrest in Tenjin, China. And his coup in 1882 failed because Qing troops intervened in 33 days. The coup by the radical progressives also failed because of Qing troops. In a sense, both of them in the same page in terms of against Qing and Kojong and Queen Min. So they started to form an alliance against Kojong and Queen Min, and they are becoming pro-Japan. This is the end of chapter 10 of part 1.